Is testing asymptomatic patients essential or unnecessary? Do non-COVID patients suffer when testing in particular is not allowed? I'm joined by two special guests. Dr. Amrish Satwik is vascular and endovascular surgeon at Ganga Ram Hospital, and he's put out a series of tweets on the issue. And Atishi is the MLA and spokesperson of the Aam Aadmi Party. I want to come to you, Dr. Satwik, first, because you have said that busy hospitals and labs are being probed and barred from COVID testing in the middle of a pandemic for testing asymptomatic cases. Why do you believe it is so critical to allow hospitals to test every asymptomatic case that may come into hospital, whether it's COVID or non-COVID? Everyone needs to be tested.
That's because it's the fundamental duty of any hospital to prevent what is known as intramural spread of infection. We're in the middle of a pandemic. There are very serious and sick patients being admitted for a host of reasons. And if you don't know the COVID status of this patient, it's entirely possible that a COVID positive patient might be sharing a ward with a COVID negative patient, and there might be cross-infection. It's all the more important in surgical patients because you need to have some sort of an assessment of COVID status pre-operatively, because there's overwhelming evidence now that if you are to operate on a COVID positive patient, the risk of mortality is very high, as much as 25%, and the risk of pulmonary complications almost 50%. So those of us who are devoted to evidence would say that this is not an abstruse matter. This is not a vexed matter. It's not something to be debated. This is a purely technical matter, and it's to protect the most vulnerable cohort of patients that are admitted in our hospital who are COVID-free.
So correct
This
me.
has happened before.
So Dr. Satwik, what you are saying is that any patient who comes for an emergency procedure to the hospital must be tested right at the very outset because there is a danger of cross-infection. Am I correct?
No, I didn't say that. I said that those patients who are being admitted, emergency maneuvers are always performed on untested patients, and all hospitals are performing emergencies through all of this with full precautions, with PPEs. All healthcare workers are taking those precautions. I'm talking about semi-emergencies and elective cases that can wait. You know, let's say there's a patient who requires chemotherapy. Now, this is a very important decision because some of these agents that are administered during chemotherapy are immunosuppressants. And if you were to administer them to a COVID patient, that could be catastrophic. So I'm saying that for cases that are of a semi-emergency or an elective nature, I think,
Right.
because you don't find that all other ailments magically disappear in the times of COVID. You have to treat other patients. It'll be doing a great disservice to all patients if you're turning them away. And that's why this should become mandatory.
In fact, you've raised a very critical issue of chemotherapy, because there are a number of cases that we've been tracking of patients who need chemotherapy, who are finding things very difficult in COVID times, sometimes not even getting their due appointments at times in hospitals. But Atishi, you want to respond? Because the Aam Aadmi Party government seems to have taken the stand that ICMR has said that it is not mandatory to test asymptomatic patients, and therefore hospitals which do so are violative of ICMR guidelines. Surely there is a medical reason why it is essential to test asymptomatic patients.
Rajdeep, I think we are conflating two different issues here. First of all, what is the reason for which strictures have been passed on the Ganga Ram lab? That is one reason. And do we test asymptomatic patients or do we not test asymptomatic patients? That's the second issue. Strictures have been passed against the Ganga Ram lab, not because of their testing or their not testing asymptomatic patients, but because despite repeatedly warning the Ganga Ram lab, they refuse to use what is the RT-PCR app, which has been put in place by the central government, and sampling has to be done only through that.
No, you've sent notice, correct me my point, you've sent notices to 9 private labs saying that those who are testing asymptomatic patients are going against ICMR guidelines.
Please ask Dr. Satwik, what is the notice that Ganga Ram has gotten and what is the FIR that has been filed on the Ganga Ram lab? It is precisely because they refuse to use the RT-PCR app. And I'm extremely surprised at what Dr. Satwik has said, because they are not using the RT-PCR app. that is the reason why the pandemic becomes a bigger crisis. In the RT-PCR app, it's essential to put in the correct phone number. There's an OTP by which you check the phone number of the person. It's mandatory to put in the Aadhaar to check the address of the person. Otherwise, when a lab does not use the RT-PCR app, the situation you're in.
Ma'am, I asked you a clear question. Is the Aam Aadmi Party's policy that there will be no testing of asymptomatic patients? Is that why you've sent notices? Forget for a moment the FIR on Ganga Ram. I'm asking you the general principle that you're operating on.
I said, Rajdeep, we are conflating two different issues here. The issue with Ganga Ram is not about the testing of asymptomatic patients. The issue with Ganga Ram and the reason for closing down of their lab is because they do not use the RT-PCR app.
Okay, you made that point. Now you tell me the larger, I am raising the larger issue. Is the Delhi government saying asymptomatic patients are not to be tested?
Second thing, Raj, let me complete my first point, and the reason that is an important point is because it is only through the addresses and phone numbers of patients entered through the RT-PCR app can we actually track the patients.
Okay, you made that point.
Ganga Ram is
you made that point. Can we move on?
Yes, the problem with Ganga Ram is they are serial offenders. They turn away patients, they turn away suspects, they do not do the tests as per the norms, and then they come and raise a hue and cry as if the fault is of the Delhi government. So that is an important point. Second point. Why is it that the larger issue of both, not just of the testing, Rajdeep, of asymptomatic patients, Delhi government has also issued guidelines about non-admission of asymptomatic patients, apart from those who are senior citizens and those who have comorbidity, is not to be done. So first of all, Dr. Satwik's point is not valid. Asymptomatic testing has been permitted for senior citizens and for persons with comorbidity, number one. So the cases that he is talking about do not apply. Comorbidity patients can be tested. But the reason we are not allowing the testing of asymptomatic patients, nor are we allowing them to be admitted in hospitals, is because both for testing and for hospitals, there is a question of a limited capacity. And you have a very large number of people, we were getting complaints of asymptomatic people who are coming into testing centers, insisting they get tested. And as a consequence, a lot of people whose symptoms are becoming severe, patients who have other comorbidities are not able to get tested because the testing capacity is also finite.
Okay,
the same was happening with hospital beds.
Let Dr. Satwik,
beds were occupied.
Let Dr. Satwik respond to your 2 points. Dr. Satwik, point number one seems to be that there is a finite capacity for testing, and therefore the Delhi government says do not test asymptomatic patients. They are not saying don't test asymptomatic patients who have conditions of comorbidity or those who are senior citizens. That's their first point. Your response?
So I don't think the Delhi government has much say here because they're referring to ICMR guidelines.
That's right.
And I'd like to say that I'd like to know whether ICMR guidelines are statutory in nature. That's the first thing. I think most hospitals and treating physicians and surgeons should have the discretionary capacity to test for COVID. And look, I don't wish to be confrontational or adversarial here. In fact, I'd like to beseech the Honorable Legislator from South Delhi that please allow us mandatory testing for patients who are being admitted for severe ailments in Ganga Ram, non-COVID patients, because they need treatment. We need to ascertain where to treat them, where to admit them. There has to be a cordon sanitaire around wards that are COVID-free. You know, it's important to understand that there are topographic changes to be made in hospitals, which has both COVID and non-COVID patients. There's retrofitting of air conditioning, shafting has to be done, there has to be a green area for doffing and donning of PPEs. So I beseech Ms. Atishi to actually allow this. Secondly, it's not my place to talk about the FIR. I'm sure Ganga Ram Hospital, the administrators and the board of management is filing a response to that. But I can say that there has been a press release by the Delhi Medical Association condemning the FIR. And it's not my place to say how egregious an offense it is to not upload data onto an app. But I can certainly say that this FIR has been most damaging to the morale of my colleagues in Ganga Ram Hospital who have been resolutely working through all of this with unflagging energy. It's gutting and it at least seems spiteful.
Okay.
I'd like to say that,
Yeah. The charge was also made somewhere, Dr. Satwik, just a minute. That the charge was also made. There were two charges. One was, as you've now responded, on asymptomatic patient. The second charge was made that patients are being turned away.
So I don't believe, I can say this with absolute certainty, that any hospital will turn away patients if there's a bed available. We have to realize that there isn't an inexhaustible supply of beds or an inexhaustible supply of beds in the holding area. I take the point that if there is a patient who is a COVID suspect and requires evaluation and management, holding areas are not fully equipped intensive care units. You have to realize this, and there isn't an inexhaustible supply of facilities anywhere, inexhaustible supply of manpower anywhere.
Because the Chief Minister, Dr. Satwik, the Chief Minister seemed to hint today that hospitals like Ganga Ram are setting packages and profiteering, which he used the word black marketing in COVID.
So I'd say that, in the middle of a pandemic, using accusatory and denunciatory rhetoric would be ill-advised, especially for hospitals that should be your greatest allies right now. I think this seems like the Chief Minister has a dazzling, he's dazzlingly short of endearing qualities when he's doing press briefings like that. So I'd certainly say that this is ill-advised,
Atishi, let's start therefore to the fundamental points where we actually kicked off this debate, because there have been instances of patients with chemotherapy who, as doctor says, could be very vulnerable in a situation like this, who need to be tested, right? They come to the hospital, they need to be tested. They may be asymptomatic, they need to be tested. Now, why is it that the Delhi government is holding on to ICMR's May 13th guideline almost as sacrosanct and saying, look, we know better than the doctors of Ganga Ram or the doctors of any hospital in the city?
First of all, Rajdeep, let me make it clear once again that both the testing guidelines and the admission guidelines make a clear distinction for patients who are senior citizens or those who have other comorbidities. So this entire explanation that Dr. Satwik has given in his what he calls his dazzling English in the past few minutes is absolutely bogus. It is absolutely bogus, because it is based on an order which does not exist. There is a provision whereby patients with other comorbidities can be tested. Number two, he seems to say that putting details into an app is not a major offense. It is a major offense, because if you cannot track a corona patient, if their phone number is incorrect, if their address is incorrect, there is no way that the government surveillance system can actually reach out to those patients. So yes, under the Disaster Management Act, under the Epidemic Act, it is a criminal offense. And in fact, it's a moral offense, because what it means is that there is a patient out there who is corona positive, and the government cannot reach out to them. You cannot isolate them. You cannot contact trace them. You cannot put them into quarantine.
You made that point. You made that point. My point is, if you don't test asymptomatic people that could spread infection, you need antibody testing randomly to catch that. That is, most doctors say that today. Why does the government believe? Why does the government of Delhi believe they know more than doctors?
Rajdeep, I completely agree with you, and this is the reason why there was a lot of effort by the central government and by the Delhi government to procure rapid testing kits, which are basically antibody tests. But the problem that both the central government and the Delhi government faced, that all the rapid testing kits that were imported into India turned out to be highly problematic. Known corona positive patients were being shown as corona negative. So yes, the fact of the matter is that not just Delhi, but the entire country, because now we have to go with the non-rapid testing, which is the PCR testing, there is a limited capacity because it's a complicated process. It involves RNA extraction, so there's a several-hour process by which it happens. So you have to make a choice between whom you're testing. And it is more important to test patients who are in a severe condition, and those patients are the ones who are not getting tested, and those patients are the same patients who are not getting beds in hospitals.
Let me ask that to Dr. Satwik. This point which is being made repeatedly by the Delhi government, that there are finite beds, there are finite testing capacities, and therefore we need to focus on the more severe patients and not just test randomly, including asymptomatic cases. Your response, Dr. Sathwik?
Yes, I would like to respond to that. But just to offer a corrective, I said that it is not my place to say whether uploading data onto this app is an offense. I never said that it's not an offense or might not be one. I said it's not my place to say that. Secondly, I think the Honorable Legislator seems to be mistaking what the meaning of the phrase comorbidities. Let's say a person requires cancer surgery. He's a fit individual otherwise. This patient does not have comorbidities. Okay? This patient needs to be admitted for surgery and therefore requires preoperative testing. This is not a senior citizen with comorbidities. All I'm saying is that there should be, the hospital should be allowed the discretion to decide which patients they're admitting should be tested for COVID. About finite tests, I would agree. Look, whether you should be testing asymptomatic contacts of lab-confirmed COVID cases would be a decision best made by epidemiologists. Okay. Now, the ICMR circular, the strategy document dated 18th of May 2020, says that asymptomatic contacts of lab-confirmed COVID cases need to be tested. Now, this is a document that was prepared by ICMR after evaluating the number of test kits that were available. So clearly, you can't say that, suddenly now, I mean, from 18th of May to the 6th of June, you're falling short of testing kits. And that is why you're saying that you have to go slow on asymptomatic cases. I wouldn't agree with that. And that would be an incorrect assessment.
That's a very important, vital point. And I'm going to give you one final stab at this, Atishi, that why should the governments, and this is not just Delhi government, but all governments, why should governments be deciding and not leave it to the wisdom of doctors and hospitals? Surely this is their domain expertise. Let them decide whether a particular asymptomatic case should be tested or not, whether someone who comes for chemotherapy to the hospital needs to be tested or not. That's Dr. Sathwik's responsibility, not that of the Delhi government. Why not acknowledge that? Why this suspicion?
Rajdeep, two things. First of all, I would like to say once again that there is no order that states that person who has some other severe illness and therefore requires testing cannot be tested. Let me make that point very clear.
Thank you.
I am not sure why Dr. Sathwik
Thank you very much for
that point again and again.
Okay, you've clarified. Good to hear that.
Number two.
Okay.
Number two, why is it that the governments have to decide? Because the governments have to make a policy. The governments have to make policies as far as coronavirus is concerned, because this is a pandemic, and governments need to make policies regarding what kind of hospitals you have, what kind of treatment you require, how many beds are to be created. This is not a circumstance in which we can let the market decide, let a private hospital decide. It has to be decided by the government, because what happens is, because there is a limited testing capacity, the government is also getting tests done not just in government labs but in private labs. And the government is paying the private labs for those tests. But if that testing capacity, and what you don't realize, Rajdeep, is that it creates a class divide. There is a lot of people who are coming from richer upper middle class backgrounds who are getting large number of tests done even when they're asymptomatic. And there is a lot of poorer people out there who need tests, who have severe conditions, who have symptoms, who are not able to get tested.
Can I ask you, is that true? Is that true, Dr. Sathwik? No, 1 minute. You've raised a very big point. Is that true, Dr. Sathwik? That there is a class divide when it comes to testing?
Why should there be a class divide if an individual requires a COVID test?
Because a citizen who may come to Ganga Ram Hospital who may not have the money or the facilities may well get turned away, while someone who has the resources will immediately get tested. Is that true?
No, but the thing is that Ganga Ram is a private hospital, but it also has a general ward. And I'm saying that...
Please ask them how much they charge for a corona test, Rajdeep, in Ganga Ram. No, and please tell me how many poor families can afford it.
You want to respond?
No, I mean, look, government hospitals are also carrying out COVID tests. People who come to Ganga Ram Hospital know that it's a private hospital and wish to get...
Government hospitals are sending their tests, the samples, both to government labs and to private labs. There is a limited capacity. If that capacity is taken up, by asymptomatic patients, how are severe patients going to be tested? So the question is that if a limited capacity is taken up by those people just because they can pay for an expensive test, even though they don't actually need it, how is it that the poor persons who cannot afford that test can only go to facilities where free testing is happening? How are they going to get tested?
Okay, let me give you a final word, Dr. Satwik. Let's close this debate by getting a final word from you.
No,
Please
I think the Honourable Legislator...
How much Ganga Ram charges for a corona test? Please ask Dr. Satwik.
Ganga Ram charges as much as any other private lab, which is 4,500. But if it's
exactly.
Okay.
When a test is for 4,500 rupees, how many poor families can afford it?
Look, I think it's extremely presumptuous on the part of the Honourable Legislator to assume that a test is being carried out when it's not indicated. This is a fundamental problem of mistrust. I don't think that can ever be solved. If you truly believe that doctors in the city are carrying out COVID tests when patients do not require them, there is a trust deficit and you need to take corrective action there. There's no amount of whatever I say is not going to satisfy you. Okay. So there isn't a resolution to this. If you truly believe that COVID tests in the city are carried out, just randomly, then I can't help you. I'm sorry.
I think we've heard two very clear points of view, and I hope that trust deficit evaporates in the days ahead. I think a valuable contribution could be made if government and private hospitals work together. This is not about positing one against the other. Television sometimes does that, but I would like to hope that Atishi and Dr. Satwik can find enormous amount of common ground in a lot of what they've said. And that's, I hope, is the spirit with which Atishi will take to her government and which Dr. Satwik will take to the management of Ganga Ram. Work together. This is a great moment to work together at a time of a pandemic. Thank you both very much for joining us. It's been enormously educative to get two very clear points of view.
Hi everyone, Preeti Chaudhary here. Hope you like this video. For latest news and analysis, like and subscribe to the India Today YouTube channel. And don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated. Thank you for watching.